What's up, nerds? Today, I'm going to be building a Space Hulk. Now to create this, I'm going to be using some scrap XPS foam, some ship models, and some plaster rocks. So these ship models I have printed off with my FDM printer. They're okay. I can use them in Battlefleet Gothic, but I did get a resin printer, so I've been reprinting my cruisers in resin because the detail is so much better. And I figured I could repurpose these old FDM ships and use them as part of terrain or to craft a Space Hulk. So I start off by just kind of cutting down these foam pieces and finding a layout that'll work for a big hulking mass to form as the base of the Space Hulk. So you may be wondering why create a Space Hulk? Well, I wanted to have one handy so I could do some more narrative campaign series on the channel. Also, I think it might tie in pretty nicely with the new narrative coming out, Arks of Omen, for 40k. I imagine a big scenario where you have a spaceship battle using Battlefleet Gothic rules, and then some boarding action, playing some 40k games, possibly even landing on a planet. Who knows? So in order to get the most mileage with my few ship models here, I think I'm going to have to cut them up. So carefully taking a hacksaw, I go to town. And it's totally okay if these get destroyed by the vice, because they're supposed to be ruined ships anyways. And to remind everyone, these are printed ships. I'm not destroying classic rare Battlefleet Gothic ships. So then, using some hot glue, I just start slapping pieces of ship onto the pieces I have forming as the base of the Space Hulk. Also gluing on some of my rock molds. I don't really have a grand vision of how this is going to look when it's done, so I'm just kind of gluing ships in spots that seem to fit. And also cutting away pieces to make room. I guess the end result you're going for is a big clobbled mass of ships and rocks. So there's a few bare patches still left, so I just fill those in by taking my plaster rocks and busting them up and gluing them in. I also took some pieces of sprue and cut them up. I figured they might look like pieces of metal or other debris. I didn't end up using a whole lot of sprue because I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out, but knowing how it did turn out, I kind of wish I would have used more. So with all the major pieces in place, the next step is to fill in all the little gaps. So to do this, I'll be making my homemade Sculpt-A-Mold. So I take a piece of an egg carton and Cut it up into small pieces, mix in some plaster of Paris, stir in some water. So you want to go for a consistency that's very similar to cottage cheese. So if you don't get the mixture right from the start, you can just add more plaster or more water, depending what's needed. Also, this step is very messy. So I take my sculpt mold and just start filling in all the spaces in between the rocks and the ships, pretty much anywhere where I see pink. I'm trying my best not to get it all over the ships, but as you can see, it is a little inevitable. So I do take some water and a junk brush, just get it nice and wet and start brushing away anywhere where there's too much plaster, covering up some of the details on the ships. A little bit is okay because it helps tie it into the rock surface, but I don't want them totally caked in plaster. At this point, it looks like a child's art experiment, and it looks like garbage. I was half tempted to just give up at this point because it looked so bad, but I thought maybe a coat of paint will help it out. So that's what I do. Start with priming it black with the airbrush all around. Now one thing I did notice is because it's plaster, it tends to chip easily, so maybe doing a matte varnish first before priming it would have helped, but hindsight's 20/20. So I take an old flyer stand and cut it down so I can mount this on a stand and make it game playable. So using a Dremel, I just kind of cut out some of the plaster so the stand can mount nicely. And then I also prime our stand with black as well. And if anyone's curious, I'm using Vallejo Airbrush Black Matte Primer. It works very well. For a star pattern, I take just a piece of printer paper and poke some holes into it and spray over with some white airbrush paint all around the base to get some stars. I have a little overspray I need to clean up later. So for the main colors I'm going to be using are the Army Painter airbrush paints. I'm using the gray triad. So it's Regiment Gray, Uniform Gray, and then Cadre Gray. So starting with the darkest Regiment Gray, I just go all around where I had primed black. Also trying to not get too much on the ships themselves and mainly focusing on the rocks. Now with the base coat down, I come in with some uniform gray just to bring out some of the rock detail a little bit more and to give it some more volume. And then lastly, Cadre Gray, just kind of picking out some of the higher areas just to make the rock shapes a little bit more interesting and to blend all those grays together. And And then on the underside, I hit it with a mix of like a purple violet. I think I used some blues and some purples and some blacks, just to kind of give it some interesting undershading. And then lastly, I take a big cheap makeup brush and Oothian Gray and just pick out all the raised details on the rocks. If you haven't used cheap makeup brushes for dry brushing before, I'd highly recommend it. They're great for terrain and batch dry brushing large quantities of models. So once again, I'm just trying to focus on the rocks themselves and not dry brush the ships, but you see I do get the ships a little bit, but that's okay. It does tie it all together, but mainly just focusing on the rocks. Then I take a smaller makeup brush and lead belcher, and here I'm just going to dry brush over some of the raised details on the ships, just to help separate them from the rocks, make them a little bit more distinguished. And then I take some Flesh Tear's Red contrast paint and just pick out a couple spots on some of the Chaos ships just to add a little touch of color. I don't go too heavily on this because I still like the darker shadows of the black and the metal blending in there, so it looks like it's a really old, ruined ship. The best part about this whole thing is it doesn't have to be a neat paint job at all. Similarly, I come in with Militarum Green contrast paint and do the same to the Imperial ships. And then I come back to my stand with some Abaddon Black, touch up some of my overspray. And then also make sure that rim has a nice clean black coat of paint. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, the grand reveal.